You're listening to Seen with Serena Kumara, a podcast all about the journey of coming home to ourselves, the unlearning, the remembering, and the returning to what's always been true about who we are and what we deserve. Hey y'all, welcome back. If you missed episode 6, we talked about what rage was and some different ways to think about it. We're going to jump directly into how to work with that energy, because here's the thing. I don't know anybody who said, you know what I think I'm going to do today? I am going to look into my rage. What happened for me and happens for the people I work with is you keep having experiences where you feel like, wait a minute, I'm getting real mad about things, or things that didn't bother me are bothering me a lot now. And then you look up and you say, oh, that's rage reaching out and tapping me on my shoulder and saying, hey sis, hey bro, I've been here. And now it's time for us to get to know each other. It's time for you to listen to what I have to say. So we're going to talk about how to move through those seasons where rage wants to talk so we can hear what it has to say and not let it drag us under. And be as kind to ourselves as possible and do our best not to harm anybody else in our process. So I believe that there are 4 steps to really working with alchemizing rage. And each step needs to be done in order. I'm not usually a rules girl, but when it comes to this, each step needs the previous one to be most effective. And I want you to get as much as you can out of it. Step 1 is release. Now, when I say release, I'm talking about finding or creating a safe container for you to release the feelings, the emotions that are coming up with your rage. Sometimes that's somatic. That's releasing through your body movement or through your voice by speaking or by writing. But the reason why release needs to come first is because when we're in a state of rage, our nervous system is like shot. We are not in a good space to make decisions or to process, which are some of the things that come next. The first thing is to move through those feelings, give them voice without judgment or trying to fix them. Now, listen, I love an intentional release ritual. I love that they can go from really mundane things to ceremonial. You can use your voice. That's one that's really powerful for me. Getting those feelings out via the words you have to say or just to give it sound. Sometimes you don't have the words. You just need to get it out. Some people will scream into a pillow. It works. It may sound silly or simple. It absolutely works. One of my favorite things to do is a rage room. Sometimes they call them destruction rooms. It's a room that you can rent out. They have them in a lot of cities. You can rent them out in like 15-minute increments sometimes. They'll give you like a bat. They'll give you a hammer and some more stuff. And the room will be full of all the things that you can break. It was one of the most effective experiences that I have ever had in terms of giving me clarity, because rage gives us clarity. I can remember I was faced with a decision about whether I was going to cancel an event. And because of this work, the way I feel about it, it was messing me up, the idea of having to cancel it. And I just could not decide. And I had prayed, I had journaled, I had divined, and I wasn't clear. And I was like, well, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to get the answer, but I need to release these feelings. I went to the rage room. I remember there was a rotisserie, not a rotisserie chicken, like the actual rotisserie that you make the chicken with, that was in there. And I went to town and I left. And soon after that, I had clarity on what I was going to do. And I do believe that it's because that kind of clarity was freed up in that experience. Other people break plates. I've done that with clients. We did it inside of a big plastic bin, and I had her to write the things that she was releasing on the plates, and she broke the plates up. I mean, like little tiny pieces, which was beautiful to see from this just light of a person, to see her have the ability to get that out because it was living inside of her. Another way to do it, and I've been saying this for years, is writing whatever your feelings are, whatever you're releasing in watercolor markers and submerging it in water. That will wipe the words off the page, and then taking that water and pouring it back into the earth somewhere. I think that there is something very healing in nature. And also, I'm big on, if I want this energy out of my body, I don't want it circulating all through my house. The biggest, and I would almost say only pitfall that I see with these releases is that people don't let themselves go there. They will censor themselves. There's almost this block that says, if I'm a good person, I'm not allowed to even have these feelings. I think we rob ourselves of the opportunity to let it all out if we won't let it all out. And so this is what I want to say to you. Even good people have those feelings and thoughts. Out of your mouth where no one can hear you is safe. On a piece of paper where no one can read it is safe, right? In a contained space where you're supposed to be hitting and breaking things is safe. If you're going to do it, go ahead and do it. One of the simplest and most effective grounding techniques is breath work. And it really can just communicate to the body that we're safe, even if we're still emotionally charged. I'm a very simple, take a deep breath kind of girl. But there are specific breathwork techniques, some of which are even used by Navy SEALs. So it is effective. I'm not going to go through them, but I'm going to tell you what you can search to do your own research. The one used by Navy SEALs is called the box breathing technique. And you can just search breathwork for anxiety. And unless things have changed, I feel like you can actually take breathwork courses pretty much for free. There's actually something called Black Girls Breathing, where I think they do something every Sunday. So if you want to get into breath work, those are the routes that I would take. Now, I'm big on physical grounding, like putting my feet in the grass. You know how people will joke and say, go touch grass? They're trying to tell you to ground yourself in a very shady way, but it's very effective. I could tell you that I did research on why and how it works, but I didn't. I just know it works for me and it works for the people that I work with. The earth is healing naturally, and to have your skin against it is going to be effective. I have seen this done before where someone actually had like a pot and they put soil in the pot and it's kind of like out on their back porch and that's their grounding station. I thought that was pretty cool. And I love a good visualization just to bring yourself into your body, close your eyes and picture yourself in a place where you feel completely safe. Give it as many details as possible and stay there until you feel like you've come back into a state of calm. Another one is when you picture your rage as a color, like a red or a hot pink, whatever feels right for you, and visualize it flowing out of your body into the ground. I find all those techniques to be really useful to get us to a place where we can even do step number 3, where we're even open enough to listen to the message that our rage just gave us. So last week we discussed what is the cause of the rage and how that's different. You know, rage can be often triggered by our boundary being crossed, or one of our values has been ignored, or old wound has been poked, some trauma has been called up. We know that. But this is where we figure out exactly what value was violated and exactly what boundary was crossed and why it's so important to us. I think that over time, you get to a place where you can ask yourself, well, what was that about? And you can get the answer immediately, like you're in tune and in touch enough with yourself to identify it. But I do think that takes time and practice. So I'm going to give you some techniques to kind of try while you're building that relationship with yourself to be able to gain this clarity that I'm talking about. So this first one I think is super cool. It's called the 5 whys method. It might be something that you learned about regarding productivity or at work. It was actually first published by the founder of Toyota. And it's basically asking yourself why 5 times in a row. So like, why does this bother me? You ask it 5 times in a row, and around like the 4th or 5th time, that's the real answer. That's when you'll find your core value or your unresolved wound. The next one is called value mapping. Basically, you write down the opposite thing of the thing that triggered your rage, right? So like, let's say you were enraged because you felt dismissed. What is the opposite of feeling dismissed? And that's how you identify the value that's being stepped on. And then from there, you can think through, well, why is that value so important to me? And then what am I going to do about that? This is another one. It's called a guided inquiry. Basically, it's when you ask, if a younger version of me experienced this, how would they react to it? This is not something I personally have used, but in my research, I found it. And I felt like that would be a good way to connect with the younger version of yourself, because I think that version is our most honest selves. I've also found that it's not always just one thing. It's probably multiple things connected. When you unpack, you realize whatever is triggering this rage is connected to a few things. And so while I was developing this, the universe placed in front of me an opportunity to do my own 5 whys. And I realized One thing that sends me into a rage, not one where I'm going to do something to somebody, but one where like I have to come back to myself and remember like this doesn't really matter. You're fine. It's that harsh judgment of really religious people when it comes to folks that have different spiritual beliefs or folks that heal in different ways that doesn't fit inside of the dogma. Even if it's not pointed at me, I fall in that category, child. So you talking about me too. First of all, it triggers that feeling of being misunderstood, which was a theme when I was younger, and I hate it so bad. And I obviously feel that it's really disrespectful to my gift and the giver of my gift to be dismissive of the work I have been blessed enough to be a part of and the receipts I have for the transformation for the better. But also at the core of it, it has to do with that judgment because I know that I spent a really large chunk of my life being super judgmental and not in the same way about the same things, but I know it. And so when I am faced with that experience, I know I provided somebody else with it. And that's where some self-forgiveness has to come. I'm big on atonement and trying to restore balance when you've done harm. But the realization that might hit for you too is that part of this rage work requires self-forgiveness because some of the anger that you got for somebody else is really just pointed at you. Now, step 4 is the actual alchemy. This is when you decide what you're going to do with what came up in step 1 and what you learned about it in step 3. Let's talk about something called sublimation or sacred transmutation. Sublimation is a psychological term that refers to taking like a negative desire or urge and transform it into an action that is socially acceptable. Spiritually, I think of it as taking lower energies and lower feelings and transmuting them to something higher that relates to like growth, healing, and creation. I think of when you realize that your job is playing with you and you hate it and it's making you feel rage. I'm talking about taking that energy and that's when you apply for other jobs or like you go get another certification so that you don't depend on it anymore, right? I think about that as like a response to being fed up. You realize you hate it where you live. You hate the people that live in there. I'm just being honest. You can't take it no more. That's when you start really looking for apartments. You kind of were halfway looking, but now you really are looking, right? Taking that energy in that way. Or like you realize this relationship is taking a lot out of me and I'm feeling this way in response to how I'm being treated. Maybe that's when you decide that you're not going to be engaging at least for a while. Taking actions that serve you and don't harm anybody else, that is that transmutation. For me, when I'm in that space, that's when my get it done version of myself is at her highest. You will hear me talk about reorganizing my closet more times than I'm comfortable with. My consumerism was insane for years and I'm still kind of clearing it up. And so there are times where I'm like, I need to really get through this closet right now because it's getting really bad. I would let it sit, but then let my certain kind of rage be triggered by something. And all of a sudden this quadrant of this closet is done. Or maybe I'll face difficult, like an email that I have to write that I need to say something that doesn't feel so good. Maybe that's when I, get the strength to push the send button. Another thing you can do with rage is create from it. There are actually studies that show anger actually enhances creative performance. Anger boosts what we call divergent thinking. And that's that free, wild brainstorm thinking. And that's where we have our like unconventional ideas and they spark faster. There's actually a study that found angry people generated more original ideas than those feeling joy or sadness, especially under time constraints. I don't think I realized it until more recently. Rage was actually the final push towards planning the first event and actually moving forward with the Milk and Honey Project. That first event was centered around radical self-care and developing a better relationship with yourself. I had been going back and forth with the idea. I had done a lot of healing work myself and I didn't want to be the teacher, but I said, I think I could create a space that brings together experts where women can get different techniques that can support them and new information, right? That I found valuable. And then I had an interaction with someone who knew me before I had done that healing work. And I just did not like the energy, right? I remember being so insulted. Why do you think you can talk to me like this? I realized that's just how you interact with women, right? And like I was observing that. And then it hit me. I fell for it, and whoever else, wherever else, is falling for it because they need the information that I have now. And that was enough for me to push send. And then it hit me like, oh, wait a minute. If we do this right, we do so much healing work that fewer and fewer women are vulnerable to these kinds of energies, then these raggedy, ashy people have less potential victims. And it was up from there. The moral of the story is create with that energy. You're going to create something beautiful. So keep that in mind. If it's about creating or painting, writing a song or playing an instrument, that might be the time to step into creativity. I also think it's important to connect what value was being triggered when you experience rage and see what you want to do with that. Doing things like correcting an imbalance, right? If your rage is connected to an experience of injustice and you see an imbalance, what can you do to correct the imbalance in a way that benefits yourself and the rest of us? So let's say the rage comes up because we see a group targeted or mistreated. What can you do from that moment? Can you step into advocacy? Do you use your voice in one-to-one conversation? Or do you connect with an organization that fights whatever that thing is when you realize it's a problem? That's another way to transmute that energy and alchemize it into creating a better world. On a personal level, your rage comes up because you realize your friend has been, continuing to dismiss your needs. And then you realize, eventually I'm going to have a boundary setting conversation. And you need to actually do it to attempt to correct that imbalance. And sometimes that looks like direct teaching, like speak to a camera, get on your social media. Sometimes it looks like conversations with your loved ones or people that you have influence over. And that's that place where you take that pain and you turn it into wisdom, and then you are helpful to provide that to other people. Sometimes it looks like teaching a class. Sometimes it looks like creating a guide of some sort. Now, I just want to say for this whole section, I trust my audience and I think I know my audience, but just in case somebody from outside the audience hears it, I think there needs to be some kind of ethical filter for when we talk about creating and moving from the clarity that we've received in rage. We want to move into action that creates more dignity, more safety, and more alignment for the world around us. And what I'm primarily trying to say is I hope you don't hear this and think this is an opportunity to become part of organizations that harm people. So the questions we can ask ourselves when we're creating, alchemizing, teaching, etc. Is it constructive? Does it solve, illuminate, inspire, or heal? And is it safe for myself and others? These are the questions. So let's talk about self-care and navigating interpersonal relationships during this season, because we do have these seasons where they're themed, and sometimes the theme is rage. I can remember once I realized what it was, making the connection with, okay, I need to be really careful and really mindful right now about how I treat myself and how I interact with other people. I think when you're going through seasons where you're facing a lot of discomfort, flooding yourself with self-care as much as you can. There are 8 different kinds of self-care. We can talk about that on another episode, but a few of them are physical, mental, spiritual, emotional. They may have even expanded the list. It might be more than 8 now. But you need to take a look, do your Googles, find that list, and think about how you're treating yourself in each of those categories. Because if you're already kind of in a place of being wound up tight and facing discomfort, you want to give yourself as much padding as possible, right? And not just to benefit you, it's to also benefit the people around you. Another part of it was boundaries. And I mean my personal ones that connects with the self-care. Like I had to get more strict about getting rest. Babe, if you're already in a season of rage and then you want to add tired on top of it, good luck to everybody in your wake. And even yourself, right? Now, these interpersonal boundaries. What I found really helpful is to spend time in safe spaces that were safe enough for me to say, I'm feeling very sensitive right now. And so I might have to exit quicker. I'm struggling with processing some emotions right now. Not to say, hey, I'm going through this and now it's your responsibility to coddle me because I'm going to go off on you. It's a safe enough space to say, hey, we're all human and we all have these experiences. This is what I'm going through now. Can you support me? But that doesn't give free rein to just treat anybody any kind of way. one of the things that I did was say no to a lot of invitations. There were people that I met that wanted to connect and kind of build friendships with that I wish I could have been able to. But I remember telling one of them, I'm in a space where I need to spend time with people who already know and understand me. I can't really be present in building a friendship because building a friendship requires energy. A part that I didn't tell her was I don't want this ultra sensitive space I'm in to ruin whatever friendship we could potentially build. And I don't want to misunderstand you because of the headspace that I'm in right now. One of the things I don't think that I did as well then is to accept the season for what it is. I kept being like, why am I feeling like this? Not from the place of I want to understand it, but from the place of like, I just wanted to stop. I have learned about just embracing seasons we're in so that we can see the beauty and get the lesson and then move through them. Because when you push against something, I think it can slow the process. And just to step back into boundaries when we're talking about interpersonal relationship, there's a few different kinds of boundaries that we can have. We can have temporary boundaries where we say, right now, based on what I'm going through and dealing with, this is not a relationship that I need to really be pouring into. And that can last for however long you decide, right? It can also be conditional in the sense of like, okay, I can hang out with this person. Generally, they're pretty safe unless we talk about this subject. This has to be off limits, or this activity has to be off limits. This is sort of a silly example, but maybe you got a cousin that you love, but you know, when y'all get to playing Uno, it gets real ugly and you know you're already in your pop-off phase. You probably shouldn't be trying to play Uno with them right now, but y'all can hang out. That's kind of what I mean as a lighthearted example. And then eventually it could be permanent. Now, the thing about these seasons of rage, I avoided as many permanent decisions as possible. So I would leave separations as temporary, like without having a big, hey, just so you know, I never want to speak to you again conversation. I would avoid that for some kind of period or until you feel like things are settled within yourself, just to avoid regrets. But with that being said, try not to be super hard on yourself or try to do it in the perfect way. Maybe you will have a regret. We can always bounce back. Hopefully these tips will support you in taking rage out of the shadows and actually putting it to work. Instead of letting it run wild or be suppressed completely, we are able to listen to what it has to tell us and then we decide what to do with it. Because the truth is, rage is fuel, but only when we decide where it's driving us. So now let's get into this week's affirmation. I only spend time in the spaces where I am celebrated. Remaining in environments where we aren't valued is a form of self-betrayal. Go where the love is. Your self-esteem will thank you. Well, you know, sometimes it all works together. Oh, I almost forgot this week's questions to consider. Where can I let my rage guide me towards something I've been avoiding? What's one action I can take that honors the truth my rage has been trying to show me? Listen, I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here, and I will see you next week. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, and drop a comment. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, follow the show, leave a review, and share it with someone you love. You can find me on Instagram at SeenWithSerena and at milkandhoneyproject.com. Until next time, be wildly, radically, and unapologetically good to yourself. Love you.